Every offseason, front offices convince themselves they've found the missing piece. One contract, one trade, one bold decision that could finally bring a championship. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes the move that looked brilliant in December becomes the one fans can't stop talking about by July. The 2026 season has already produced several of those moments. Teams expected to dominate have struggled to keep pace. Rotations that looked unstoppable suddenly have question marks. And millions of dollars are tied up in decisions that aren't paying off the way anyone expected. Today, we're looking at the moves that organizations may already regret and why the warning signs were there all along. When the Yankees signed Carlos Rodon to a 6-year, $162 million contract before the 2023 season, the vision was simple. Pair one of baseball's hardest throwing left-handers with Garrett Cole and create one of the most intimidating rotations in the American League. Rodon had earned that opportunity. In 2021 with the White Sox, he made his first All-Star team and threw a no-hitter. Then, in 2022 with the Giants, he posted a 2.88 ERA while striking out 237 hitters across 178 innings, establishing himself as one of baseball's premier starters. The Yankees weren't paying for what Rodon had already done. They were paying for what they believed he would continue to be, an ace. But baseball rarely follows the script. Rodon's Yankees tenure has been interrupted by injuries and inconsistency. After undergoing elbow surgery following the 2025 season to remove loose bodies and address a bone spur, the Yankees expected him to return in late April or early May of 2026. Aaron Boone repeatedly emphasized that the organization wouldn't rush him back because they wanted him healthy for the long season ahead. When Rodon finally returned, the flashes were still there. The fastball had life. The slider still generated swings and misses, but command remained a work in progress. His first few starts reminded everyone why evaluating pitchers can be so difficult. One inning, he looked like an all-star. The next, walks and elevated pitch counts completely changed the game. In his 2026 debut against Milwaukee, Rodon struck out 4 hitters and didn't allow a hit through his first 3 innings. Then his command slipped. Walks, a hit batter, and missed locations turned a dominant outing into another frustrating reminder of how little margin for error exists after returning from injury. A few weeks later against Toronto, Rodon took another step forward. He struck out 7 Blue Jays over 5 innings and looked much sharper than he had in his previous outings. The problem was that the Yankees couldn't score. New York was shut out 2-0, wasting one of Rodon's strongest performances since returning from surgery. That's what makes massive contracts so difficult to evaluate. Sometimes the player does enough to win, and the team still loses. The Yankees didn't just invest in one pitcher. They invested in the belief that an elite rotation would carry them back into October. But injuries tested that plan almost immediately. With Rodon working his way back and other pitchers dealing with their own health concerns throughout the season, New York was forced to rely on younger arms in key moments while waiting for its veteran rotation to stabilize. No one questions Carlos Rodon's talent. The velocity is still there. The strikeout ability is still there. The question is whether a team with championship expectations can afford to depend on a rotation that has spent so much time battling injuries. Because when one of your biggest investments isn't consistently available, every series becomes more difficult. Every losing streak feels a little longer, and every front office decision receives even more scrutiny. For the Yankees, what once looked like the foundation of another World Series run has become one of the biggest questions surrounding their 2026 season, and they aren't the only contender learning that lesson the hard way. But the Yankees are not the only team discovering that big decisions can become expensive problems, because in baseball, the hardest part is not making a move. The hardest part is knowing when a move has stopped working, and that is exactly what another contender has been forced to deal with. The Atlanta Braves built one of the strongest organizations in baseball over the last several seasons. They developed young stars. They locked up core players early. And they created a roster that looked capable of competing for championships year after year. But by 2026, The biggest question surrounding Atlanta was no longer whether they had enough talent. It was whether that talent could stay healthy long enough to matter. For years, the Braves relied on one of baseball's deepest pitching groups. Their formula was simple: find elite arms, develop them, create a rotation capable of handling October pressure. But pitching depth can disappear quickly. One injury changes the rotation, then another injury puts more pressure on the bullpen. Suddenly, a team that looked unbeatable on paper starts searching for answers every 5 days. That is the danger of building a championship roster around pitching. A lineup can survive a cold streak. A pitcher can recover from one bad outing. But when multiple arms are unavailable at the same time, the entire structure begins to collapse. The Braves weren't dealing with one single problem. They were dealing with a chain reaction. Fewer healthy starters meant more innings for replacement pitchers. More pressure on the bullpen meant less room for mistakes. And every close game became harder to win. The frustrating part for Atlanta is that this was not supposed to be a rebuilding year. This was supposed to be another championship window. A team built to compete now. But baseball has a way of punishing teams that assume yesterday's success will automatically continue tomorrow. And then there is the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that entered the season with expectations that were completely different from where they eventually found themselves. The Blue Jays had built a roster around proven names, players who had already shown they could perform at the highest level. But the problem with talented rosters is that expectations become much higher. A rebuilding team can explain losses. A contender cannot. When a team is expected to win, every losing streak creates more questions. Why isn't the offense producing? Why are close games turning into losses? Why does a roster full of recognizable names suddenly look vulnerable? That is what made Toronto's struggles so surprising. It wasn't one obvious weakness. It was a collection of problems happening at the same time. A missed opportunity here, a bullpen mistake there, an important hit that never came. Those small moments add up over a 162-game season, and suddenly, a team that believed it was ready for October is fighting just to stay in the conversation. That is the common theme between these teams. The Yankees, Braves, and Blue Jays did not fail because they lacked talent. They failed because talent alone is never enough. Front offices are judged by more than the players they acquire. They are judged by timing, health, roster construction, and whether they can adapt when the game changes. Because the biggest regrets in baseball are rarely the moves that looked bad immediately. The biggest regrets are usually the moves that looked perfect, until reality caught up.